Hi, everybody. Welcome to the third week of Culturama. This is Sunday, the third session. We're going to have Yishun lie in a second. We have one more today. This afternoon, this evening at 5 o'clock, we're going to have Robert Peluso, that bundle of joy and energy, talking about creating comic books. He comes from a very interesting space where he started off life as a screenwriter, then became a writer of screenwriters. He worked on Screenwriter magazine. He's done comic books, and then he finally it's landed on fiction, and he teaches fiction with me at Mount Sac. But that's not what's happening now. Oh, by the way, all of these are being recorded. I'm seeing a couple of people who are new to this, so I'm going to show you this. All of these are being recorded on our Culturama community page, which I'm about to show you is right there. And not all of them, anything that where there aren't privacy concerns, we're putting up here. And so you'll be able to follow Yishun and all the rest. Just make sure that over here, you sign up as a follower, either just general follower or by email. Okay, great. Looks like there's a question. I'm going to stop.
Oh, no, it's just me.
Okay. Okay, good. Okay. Yeah, Marta has one of those that just kind of does that, and she may or may not be back. Okay, so today we're going to talk to Yishun, who is just recently released. Should have been closer. This book, Pinups, which is a fantastic book. I've read it 3 or 4 times now, and it's a long form essay, and she's going to talk to us about how to write it, how to pitch it, all that stuff. Okay, so Yishun.
Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for having me again. I'm super excited to be here. It is always my joy to teach at Culturama. I'm super, super lucky to have known John before I moved back to California, actually. I grew up here and then moved away to the East Coast and to Chicago, and then back to the East Coast again. And then when I moved back here, I just, being around somebody who is so focused on the community and building it on a regular basis, I hope that you all get a chance to know John if you don't know him already, and spend some time in his milieu, because it is well worthwhile. So, okay, so I'm going to do like a very, very brief presentation here, talk to you about conceptualizing the long essay, and then we'll talk a little bit about the writing of the thing, and then about the selling of the thing. And let's see what else. I just want to point out the chat box here, which you guys can use to put some questions in. If you have any questions, please feel free to interrupt, or John as well. Feel free to interrupt if there's some kind of burning question or something. But in general, I'm really excited to talk to you about this, because the long essay is kind of a form that I've been noodling over for a long time. And now to know that there is a market out there for it, not just in terms of periodicals, but also in terms of places that will publish long essays as discrete volumes. It's really a pleasure to work in the field, knowing that there are publishing houses out there who will give the long essay a longer life, right, as it were. Okay, and also just a fun little tidbit. Back in the 90s, the average length of a New Yorker article was 17,000 words, which is really long. For the purposes of this particular session, we'll be talking about essays that land somewhere between the 9,000 and 12,000 word realm. Okay, so right around there. And just so you know, most publications, when they ask you to write long, generally are looking around 2,000 or 3,000 words. The average length of a newspaper article or a magazine or newspaper article is about 1,500 words. Okay, so that's just sort of some things you need to know about the industry. All right. Okay, so I'm going to share my screen. I'm going to walk you through conceptualizing the essay. Meh. This is always a struggle for me. Those of you who have been in my classes, you know that I'm like, it's kind of a problem. All righty, here we go. You all should be able to see my screen now. And I'm going to drag you over here so I can see better. And we're going to do, ta-da! Presenter view. There we go. Okay, nice work. All right, so this is conceptualizing writing and selling the long essay, and we'll go through each of these steps in length later on. But first, I want to share with you some words that I've learned from my reading recently. In Twyla Tharp's book, The Creative Habit, Twyla is a I'm talking about her like we're like best friends already. I don't know her at all. Okay, so anyways, I shouldn't call her Twyla. Miss Tharp has written a book called The Creative Habit. She is a choreographer, a well-known choreographer. She's worked with everybody from George Balanchine to Alvin Ailey. And she has sort of a rigorous kind of sense of creativity. So she wrote this book called The Creative Habit, which is here. Oh, you can't see it, can you? Can you guys see it? Maybe you can see me, right? Okay. It is it's I don't know. I mean, I'm having a hard time working my way through it, but every single chapter has exercises in it, which is great. Right? It might work for some people, might work for others. But in any case, one of the things she says in the book is that she recommends that you read fat. Okay. So what does it mean to read fat? It means that you're not just reading a book, you're also reading around it, right? You're reading all the related texts around the novel. You're reading books by the author's contemporaries, the biography of the writer's letters. Okay. So really what you're doing is kind of like absorbing everything. All right. And I bring this piece of advice to you because I think that this is kind of the way that I write as well, right? When I write about something, or when I read about something, or when I'm doing something, I have a terrible habit of wanting to pick up bits and pieces from, from around the internet, or from around the library that I have, or in the pages of any library that I'm in, right? And you all have experienced some version of this, right? So for instance, if you have ever fallen down a YouTube wormhole, Dave Grohl from the Foo Fighters is a particularly bad wormhole for me to fall into. Sometimes I will be watching a video, and then down on the side, it'll show like the list of related things that you might be interested in, right? And that's a really big problem, because then what happens? You finish watching the video and you're like, oh, I'd like to watch this, right? And then suddenly 3 hours later, you're watching a groundhog eating a banana and you don't know how you got there, okay? Like, this is the thing that really happens. That's viewing fat, right? Now, of course, it's not as diligent as reading fat, but it is something that I find allows us to expand our imaginations, right? And remember, here, we're talking about conceptualizing the long essay. So this is one of those things that I think about when I'm considering conceptualization, right? The idea of intaking as much information as possible and letting your brain run free whenever you see something that's interesting to you, right? And in fact, you'll notice, like, let's see. So in the Twyla Tharp book, you see I have a bunch of tabs here, right? And all of these tabs are typically things that I'm interested in, that I either want to come back to, or things that I have found connect me to something else, right? So when I go back through the tabs later on, what I'll do is indulge all those different brain waves that I had as I was reading this particular book. Okay, it takes me a long time to read a book. Let's see, I'm just going to do this person. Okay. All right. And then the second thing she said is that she was reading some work from Stephen Kosslyn, who is a psychologist at Harvard. And he said that there are some ways to come up with ideas, some ways to treat ideas in order to be able to get the most out of them, right? The first is to generate the idea. The second is to retail the idea, which essentially means to broaden the scope of what that might mean. Then you inspect each one of those ideas, and then you transform it, right? I.e., you move it from the original germination of seed into something that it might become, right? So for instance, in pinups, which is here, right? In pinups, this is 9,000 words, by the way. It started out with the idea of, why do I have such a complicated relationship with sport, right? That was the one question, all right? I didn't understand what my long, complicated relationship with sport was about. But from that question, I was able to extrapolate out into lots and lots and lots of different things. Okay. And that, of course, came into transforming the idea. By the way, one thing that I find is really interesting here is that these 4 steps, the first 4 letters of these spell out grit. Okay. And if you've ever read any Angela Duckworth, or if you know anything about her work around grit, what she says is that grit is the single best predictor of success. Now, for our purposes, if we're calling success the publication of a work, or many people reading our work, one thing we might consider is that the overarching important part of grit is that you are finding some purpose in it, right? And purpose typically means not just that you are interested in the idea yourself, but that something about that idea will also serve humanity at large. Okay, and I think when we think about writing larger works of prose, or larger works of poetry, or any creative work, really, what ends up happening is that we think that there's something about that work that will serve humanity at large. Okay, so it's just something that I noticed. It was an interesting cross-pollination for me. The fact that great ideas happen because of these four different steps that you take, and that the beginning letters of those first four words spelled out grit, I think was really interesting. Okay. Oops. Yep. Okay. Here we are again. Me struggling with my stuff. And then recently, I was reading Barack Obama's newest work, which is The Promised Land. This is a very big book. It is the first book is 699 pages long. It's very, very, very big. This is not a book, by the way. Like, if you read in bed like I do, this is not a book you want to drop on your face. That has happened to me a couple times. It's not. It's not a good move. But he actually said that the book ended up being 2 volumes, right? But then he says, each time I sat down to write, I found my mind resisting a simple linear narrative. Often I felt obliged to provide context for decisions I and others had made, and I didn't want to relegate that background to footnotes or endnotes. Repeatedly, it's memories, by the way, my memories would toss up seemingly incidental details that captured in a way the public record never could my lived experience. So what Obama is doing here is he's writing fat, right? There's reading fat, where you're kind of like allowing your brain to go off in different directions and explore all the different rabbit holes you might go under. Obama, in this case, is writing fat, right? He's allowing his brain to go in the different directions and explore them in a textual sense, so that he can actually fill us in on the background that's going on. All right. So these are the 2 things that I was thinking about as I was preparing this presentation for you. So let's look at what this looks like in practice, right? What does reading fat and writing fat look like in practice? So we'll use this book as an example. And I'm not gonna, I don't need to tell you like what it's about per se, because in the next 2 slides it'll actually demonstrate that a little bit. One thing I didn't do was I didn't limit myself to one particular aspect of this question. I explored the question in a in a lot of different fashions. And one way to look at it is by way of like the geographical map, right? In a lot of cases, you'll find writers who will say, well, I really need to find a way to um, you know, uh, package this thing up so it makes sense to some people, right? And one way to do that is to do it geographically, right? I'm going to focus on my time spent in this particular region of the world, or I'm going to talk about it in this particular region of the country, right? And typically that might correspond to something like a length of time that you spent in one particular area or another. I didn't do that. I allowed it to kind of like range broadly, right? So over the course of the book, we find ourselves going from Southern California to Central California to Chicago to New York, and then to DC, right? And although the book doesn't take place in each of these, it doesn't. Well, no, that's not true. Yeah, it does. It does take place in each of these places. The point is that I didn't force myself to confine myself to any one particular geographic area. Okay. There are other constraints that you can put into place. Constraints are a very, very, very good thing, because they allow you to focus in on a subject. But what that doesn't mean is that as you're drafting the thing, it doesn't mean that you should restrain yourself from moving to one area or another. Okay. Just, think very freely about it and allow yourself to broaden yourself in scope. Okay. And a narrative. All right. And one other thing I want to show you before we move on here is that although the narrative of pinups does follow a linear narrative in terms of time, i.e., we go from teenage me to current me. I didn't limit myself in terms of the different things that I thought about as I was progressing through these areas, right? So throughout the entire narrative, each one of these subjects comes up on a regular basis, right? So race and culture and belonging, economics, women in America, and role models, all of these things come up, right? So what I did was to describe a very big circle around my entire existence, and then I kind of pulled from the places that would influence the narrative in the way that I wanted to influence. Okay, all right. So we're going to practice this after a fashion. What I would like you to do is well, this isn't really an exercise. This is just the thing I want you to do. Okay. So Linda Berry, I'm going to stop share. So that's the end of the presentation here. Okay. So this is Linda Berry. She wrote a book called Syllabus, and she is a MacArthur genius in the craft of creativity, right? What she does, she teaches a class at the University of University of Wisconsin-Madison. It's super popular. It's all about creativity, and it's about exercising the joys of your brain, right, when it comes to creativity. And one of the things that she espouses is her basic quick diary, all right? And it looks like this. So on a page of construction paper, or on a notebook that's like one of these standard construction books, right? Okay. Not construction, composition, sorry. What you'll do is you'll draw this grid, okay? And the grid has at the top here things I did, things I saw, something I overheard someone say, okay? And then she wants you to doodle something, all right? Each one of these categories, the top two here, has 7 items on it, okay? So the thing you'll notice about this diary, though, is that it's really mostly about observation, okay? It's all about the things that you're paying attention to, the things you see, the things you overhear, and then the doodling part of it is really about exercising your brain in a different direction, all right? I ask almost every student that I come across to do this particular diary, and the reason is because it tells you the things you're thinking about and the things that are on your mind. Because the first part of ideal conceptualization is figuring out the things that are on your mind on a regular basis. What are you thinking about all the time? What is it that makes your brain tick? What are you interested in, right? And you will find by the way, you're not supposed to send any more than, let's say, 2.5, 5, 6. You're only supposed to send 6 minutes overall on this entire diary per day, okay? And the reason is because we don't want you to think too much about the stuff that you're conceptualizing, right? We want you to be paying attention after the fact once you've drawn these things down, but we don't want you to be overly obsessed with something like navel gazing, for instance, right? It's a little bit ironic because at the end of the day, something like a long essay really is a lot of navel gazing. That's what it is, right? You're spending a lot of time inspecting yourself and trying to figure out what makes you tick and all that stuff. But this particular diary is really all about observing yourself. I think I said earlier that writers aren't really, I don't believe we're very much more imaginative than anybody else. I think we're just really great eavesdroppers, and a large part of that is eavesdropping on yourself, right? And paying attention to the things that move you and the things that matter to you. Okay, so your exercise for the next 30 days is to keep one of these diaries, and I will John, should I send around to you maybe kind of a draft of this diary?
If you send me something, I can put it up on the community page.
Okay, good, terrific. All right, I'll send you a PDF of this particular page so that folks can use it. Okay, it's an excellent diary. I use it all the time myself, and actually, it has provided me a really good bird's eye view, ironically, into the things that matter to me. Right? Okay, and this will help you as well. All right. Okay, so another exercise. Let's see. Can I elaborate more about it? Yeah, John, do you want to unmute yourself and tell me more about what parts of it you find interesting and what parts you want more clarity on? Can John unmute himself or no?
You should be able to.
Oh,
It's John Luna.
yeah. Is there more than one John in the room?
Well, there's me.
Yes, there is. Sorry. John Luna, if you want to unmute yourself and say more about that. Victoria, the name of the book is Syllabus, Notes from an Accidental Professor. Okay, John, when you get your unmuting figured out, we can say more about that later on for sure. I'd be more than happy to do that, okay? All right, the second exercise though, which is again, really about letting yourself go, is about drawing connections where you might not otherwise see connections, right? Because at the end of the day, one of the things that I find is most useful when it comes to conceptualizing a long essay or in the writing of it is to make sure that you're able to see connections where other people may not have seen them before, right? For instance, I saw a direct line between the question of why I was so interested in sport and the lack of women who looked like me in the outdoors on a regular basis, right? And then from there, I drew a direct line to women's leadership, and from there, I drew a direct line to female artists in the 1600s. Okay, so it was like for me, it was all very obvious, right? But to other people, it might not be so obvious. So this exercise that I want to show you now is a really good way of exercising those interstitial muscles. Okay. Okay. So here's what we're going to do. Take a blank piece of paper or write on your computer screens if you like. And we're going to take the next minute and jot down the first 10 words that come to mind. Okay. Alrighty. They're not any particular words in general. They're just the first 10 words that come to mind. Okay. All right, ready? Go. Another 5 seconds. Okay. All right, everybody got 10 words? Doesn't matter. 10 words. Okay. All right, go ahead and circle one of the words at random. Okay. We're going to take the next 8 minutes and write about that word that you've circled. Okay. Uniquely about that word. All right. 8 minutes is a bizarrely long time. It feels like forever. Ready? And go. Okay, we're about halfway through. Okay, we got about a minute left. Go ahead and wrap up. Okay. Nice work, everybody. All right. How was that? There is another step to this, but I'm curious to see how things went for you. Did you find yourself able to stick to that one topic, or did you find your brains kind of slipping and sliding? Good,
Little
John. I'm
column
glad.
A, little column B.
Little column A, little column B, right? Yeah, it's a bit.
Yeah.
It's 8 minutes is one of those things that it's like it feels like just long enough for you to be like, what am I going to write about? And then your brain kind of takes you in a different direction, doesn't it? That's what it seems like to me, anyways. Anybody else want to weigh in on how that was for them before we move on to the next step of this?
I was going to write about something different than I usually do. So I had a list of 12 things, and right in the middle was the word mountain. And then I closed my eyes to circle to do it randomly and circled mountain. So the one thing that I always write about is what I was writing about now.
That's amazing. I love that. I love that. That's great. And I love that you were also so diligent about doing something randomly, because there's two ways you can look at it, right? You can do it randomly, which will take you in a direction that may take you in a direction that's unusual. But for me, I thought it was interesting that I think it's interesting to test myself and see where my brain thinks it's going to go or where it wants to go, right? So, and that actually brings us to the second part of this, which is that I'm now going to make you write for another 8 minutes, but I'm going to make you write for 8 minutes about the reason that you may have picked this particular word to write about. Okay. In John's case, it's obviously, I closed my eyes and I did it, right? But there's also another extrapolation to be drawn from that, right? Maybe the concept of exploring, what it is about writing about this that makes you feel, right? Or just in general, why it is you gravitate towards this subject on a regular basis, maybe, right? Maybe this is one of those things you want to consider. But the whole point of the second part of this exercise that we'll be doing now, this question of why it is we may have written about this particular word, is that it allows you to draw more tenuous connections into more solid fashion, right? So you may have believed that you just randomly picked this word, but in some way, shape, and form, there's always some kind of thing going on underneath. And you may discover that at the end of 8 minutes, and you may not, but it is something that I would like us to try. So for the next 8 minutes, everybody flex your fingers, because that was a long stretch, right? Crack those knuckles. And we're going to do another 8 minutes again on why it is we may have chosen that particular word to write about. Okay. All right. We ready? And go ahead. All right, about 2 minutes left, everybody. Okay, go ahead and wrap up your thoughts there. All righty. Nice work, everybody. Okay, so I forgot to do the thing I always forget to do at the beginning of class, which is to tell you all that everything I'm telling you is what works for my brain, okay? Along with picking up some other things that I've learned from other writers and some other inspiration from other writers and other professionals over the course of my life. But your brain is unique to you. So whatever works for you should be the thing that you follow through to the very end. There is no right or wrong in this profession. It's a very, very slippery beast to conquer. So do honor to the way that your own brain works, and let's make sure that that you're taking on this advice as just that, right? It's just advice. It isn't meant to be prescriptive in any way, shape, or form. It's just another set of tools for you to use as you progress on the road to becoming a professional published writer. Okay. And in the lines of that, I want to notate that for me, when I started writing pinups, there was a question, right, of why outdoor sports mean so much to me. But really, the whole cascade of thought and the thing that started me pulling on the thread that I started to pull on that eventually became pinups was that my friend Eric decided to go on a long canoe trip down the length of the Mississippi River. And when I first heard about this, it was a solo canoe trip. When I first heard about this, I was filled with an unanswerable rage. I was really angry. And I couldn't figure out why, and the book at the end of the day was my answering of that question, why it was that I was so angry that Eric was able to take this canoe trip. And at the end of the day, the answer came down to the fact that Eric is a Germanic looking white man who has felt at home everywhere in the world. And he can take a canoe trip down the length of the Mississippi River and stop off at random tiny little towns and not feel as if he's in danger or not feel as if he's, going to be giving something up of himself. Right. And that started me, down this road. Right. But the exercise we did in part illustrates that. You start with the germination of an idea, right? Or you start with one word and you track that back to motivation, right? Something that might be more interesting to you or larger, right? So for instance, my word, for some reason, I'll just give you my list just to give you an idea of like how random this whole thing was for me. The list was hamburgers, marshmallows, tea, books, lotion, keyboards, pages, crayons, pens, and dogs. Okay, so in some part, these were things that were on my desk, and I guess I'm hungry in some way, shape, or form. I don't know. But at the end of the day, I circled the word lotion. So I started to write about lotion, and at the beginning, it was just kind of like, oh, I like the way it feels. I like the way it smells. When I was in high school, somebody gripped my hand one time and said, Oh my gosh, such a weird thing for a friend to notice. The web between your thumb and your index finger is really dry all the time. I noticed it about you. And she was like, your dad is a doctor. Why is he not helping you to manage this dry skin condition? And I was like, Katrina, like, why are you asking me about this? It's so weird. And then from there, it spiraled into this like sort of rumination about what it means to engage in self-care, right? So then when the second 8-minute writing period came around, I started thinking about why it is that I was thinking about lotion, right? Like why might I have been thinking about lotion and self-care and whatnot. And I think it's because I have always been obsessed with gifts, right? And lotion is one of those gifts that you give people that you don't know very well. You know, one of those things where you're like, oh yeah, I think she might like lavender. I don't really know. I've got this thing of lotion in my cupboard, so I'm just going to give it to her, right? Type thing. So for me, I can see that being an exploration later on, right? But big caveat being that you can write very long essays about very, very small things. You know, it doesn't have to be like how Yishun feels about lotion. Like, I mean, you know, that might be a tiny topic, but at the end of the day, you can spin a very, very long essay out of it. John McPhee was famous for writing very long essays about very small things. He did them about wooden boats. He did them about oranges. You know, anything that intrigued him, he would write about, right? And I mean, whole books have been born this way, right? So this is a thing that you want to look at. But again, long essays can be about very small things and they can be about very large things. It just really depends on your brain and how far you want to take it, right? At the end of the day, though, and actually, you know, I would like to hear from you all. Was anybody surprised by what they came up with at the end of the day? Yeah, John Branningham, tell me.
I want to voice for John Luna because his mic's not working.
Oh, okay.
I'm just going to read what he wrote to me.
Awesome.
He said, one of my words was hope. I guess I circled it because I just got a new job and I'm worried about what's going to happen next. It's a new state and I worried about making friends. If everything will work out and if I'll be okay. I guess I don't know till I get there, huh?
Nice. Okay, good. Yeah, I love that. I love that. So really to me that speaks of a question of insecurity, right? Of not really knowing potentially what comes next. And I think that that speaks to a larger atmosphere of what we're feeling right now in our country, right? It's very reflective. So there's certainly that as well. Yeah. Does anybody else want to share like what they may have come up with?
I can. This is
Mhm.
Victoria.
Okay, hi.
I had this list. I don't want to read the whole list, but it was just
Of
like
course.
things that are around me and everything. But spine was the last thing on the list because my spine hurts right now. And so
Oh,
it seems like a natural thing to like, oh, that hurts, you know, so I wrote it down. So I started writing little things at 8 minutes. I thought, well, I'll write about what, you know, this accident that I was in 9 years ago, because that's what started this kind of thing. And like what I do, I take Pilates and stuff, and it helps a lot. It's very easy. Usually I can really control it, but kind of talking back on the politics, which you were just talking about, this has been hard to control lately when I'm waiting for the coup, you know, kind of a thing. So I was writing about this, but how I first got in an accident was I was trying to help my mother, who was just in the early stages of dementia and needed some food. And my mother, even though she was in this early stage of dementia, she could still pick up catchphrases, you know, from things that she had done in the past. And so she would always say, no good deed goes unpunished. So when she found out I was in this accident, after bringing her this, my whole effort was to bring her various meals, she said to me, no good deed goes unpunished. So that's what I was writing about for the first 8 minutes, you know. And then we thought, well, why do you pick this word? But I thought, you know, there's also the idea that, you know, she's close to death now. We've been doing several things with our parents and moving them different places and trying to take care of them. And during the pandemic, you know, she needed a lot of care, and my sisters and I decided to do it because you couldn't visit like in a care place, you know. So we had a spine, and you know, you think often spine is like a metaphor for will or stamina or moral strength, you know. And so all of a sudden it does move out and start to fit into those things. And just thinking of my mom and like all these places and how much of our time that she's taken during this time. So it does end up to be interesting in that way. It goes from like just thinking my back hurts, you know, to, you know, where am I with my mother, who's, you know, in our relationship and her closeness to death and stuff. So it's interesting. It does move outward. I'll definitely say that.
definitely. Yeah. I think there's a real sense of detective work, you know, when it comes to this type of interrogation of self, right? We're talking about interrogating our motives and our interests, but we're also talking about, again, pulling at that one thread and kind of seeing where it leads, right? So there's a real sense of deduction like that goes on when it comes to this type of writing in this particular topic, right? For sure. Lisa, you had your hand up earlier.
Yeah, I was just going to say what I had noticed when I was writing is that I had enough time to write about 2.5 paragraphs each time. And they were virtually indistinguishable. I mean, I know the first time I was writing about the topic and the second time I was writing about the why, but the first time, like the first paragraph was about the topic and the second paragraph kind of started on the why. And then on the second write, then it kind of did the same thing in reverse.
Yeah.
You know, I kind of started on the why and went back to the topic, and they were really kind of interchangeable. It wasn't really like there was a difference between one and the other to me.
That's really interesting. Yeah. And so what's interesting about this exercise is that I actually stole it from Brenda Miller, who is a wonderful nonfiction writer, but she actually stole it from Linda Berry. So, and she kind of took it from, and by the way, this is one of those things that I would like you all to know, which is that great writers steal. It's just the thing that we do from each other. You know, we're always kind of like picking up ideas. Obviously, plagiarism is a big no-no, and that's not the point of this. But really, it's about picking up inspiration from each other, right? So, by way of Brenda Miller, what she says is that what she likes to do is put these 8 minutes. Sorry. What she likes to do is give herself space between the 8 minutes. Okay, so she'll write the first 8 minutes of about the word that she's chosen, and then she'll go away for a week sometimes, you know, and then come back and write the why. I personally don't feel like that actually works so well for me. I like to write them back to back, and then I get up and I walk away and I leave it for a week, and then I come back to it, you know, to see if my brain has come up with anything else, right? But again, honor your own, you know, big, beautiful, unique brains, and see where we go from there. Okay, so the next thing I'm going to tackle is a bit trickier. It is revision. Revision is really going to be the bulk of anybody's writing, and I think that is one of those things that is kind of a hard and fast rule, right? Because you can write this thing and you may have felt like you've eviscerated yourself and you've gotten out all the stuff you need to get out, but usually that needs some serious trimming. It needs some serious rearranging. And at the end of the day, John actually saw a first draft of pinups, you know, and at the end of the day, the question he had to ask me was, I'm confused. What is this about? Right. And the reason is because there was so much like logorrhea. It was like, blah, you know, here's Yishun's brain. It is a big mess, and I'm going to show it to you, right? Okay, and that's lovely. I mean, John knows way more about me now than he ever needs to know, right? Okay, but the beauty of it is that you can now carve and shape out of that big block of, I was going to say marble, but it's really more like a big mess of gristle. It's like it's just a big blob that you need to start trimming things away from. And the beauty of it is that you can shape it so that it becomes something that that really makes sense to you, right? And that will make better sense to other people. So the two questions you need to ask when it comes to revision are, what is it about? What is this thing about, right? And then the second question you need to ask is, so what? Why does it matter? Like, why does it matter for anything, right? And these are the two questions, by the way, that you're going to be asking yourself of any creative work in any way, shape, or form. So again, what is it about, and so what? Okay, so the first question is really about shape, kind of like, you know, what do you want the reader to walk away with at the end of the day when they've closed the cover or turned the page on your particular essay? And the second question is really about stakes. Why does it matter? You know, why does this particular piece matter, right? Sorry, I just had a brain fart of a memory where I sent my dad my very first byline in a national paper, and he said to me, "You should be writing things about people, you should be writing about things that people care about." And I was like, "Oh, I'm not quite sure what to say about that, Dad, but all right. Guess you're not that interested in travel." Okay. Anyways, so yeah, it should matter to somebody, right? Find a topic that matters to you, obviously, but also that matters to somebody else. Okay. And then the third thing I want you to consider in revision is whether or not you can see a clear theme or a clear narrative arc, right? And those are two different things. Okay, the theme is the sort of like, what is it about, right? And then the narrative arc is about change. In any piece of prose, again, this is one of those common wisdom type things that I believe in my readings and in my ratings has rung true. We like to see a change between the person we meet at the beginning, or the narrator we meet at the beginning, and the narrator we encounter at the end. Okay, so there should be, in some way, shape, or form, some kind of sea change within the reading itself, right? So you can feel that the narrator has changed in some way, shape, or form. Okay, but yeah, revision is going to take up kind of like a big part of your process. Okay, all right. So I promised you that we would also talk about the selling of these things, and we will get to that. But I want to pause for a second and see if there are any questions, anything at all, really. Okay, cool. Any comments or any things you guys want to run over? Great. Okay, terrific. All right. Okay, so the selling of these things is, I'm going to drop a link into the box. Let's see. Everybody can access the chat box, right? Yeah. Okay. All right. So this is a category of writing that has acquired the name creative nonfiction chapbooks. Okay. Chapbooks were formerly the purview of poetry. It comprises what, 18, 20 poems, right, John? Would you say around that? Like, depending on how long the poems are. But the idea being that it is still a discrete volume that you can, that you'll have printed, and they're sold in, like, discrete volumes, as it were, right? Okay. There wasn't previously a big market for creative nonfiction chapbooks, i.e. memoir chapbooks, but now there is. So this particular link is the best compilation that I have seen so far of a listing of creative nonfiction chapbook publishers. Okay, so it's in the box right now. This is Chelsea Biondiolo. She's a really, really, really lovely, very talented nonfiction writer. And at the bottom of her post here, you'll see a list of places that publish nonfiction chapbooks. Okay, the publishing house that I went with, this is technically not a chapbook per se, it's just a discrete volume. In terms of size, though, you would still call it a chapbook. You see it's 4x6 trim size, it's little. It is end to end, it's 65 pages, but the body of the work is 45 pages. Okay, so it's little, but that is about the length that you would expect to see out of a nonfiction chapbook. Another publisher that I do not think is on that list is called creative nonfiction, and their venue is called True Story. Sorry, I'm looking for one right now. I do not have it. Okay, and I'll put that in the chat box as well. Okay, now the thing is, every single one of these publishers will have another set of terms, an individual set of terms. Okay, so in this particular publishing house, what happens is they basically treat you like you're publishing a regular book. All right, so they put behind you the same marketing effect, they put behind you the same effort that they would put behind any one of their standard length books. You get distributed by their particular distributor, which is Ingram, and it is a pretty good deal. The others, though, might be a little bit different. In the case of True Story, for instance, what they'll do is they'll publish a limited run of your essay. It is not perfect bound. This is what's called perfect bound. That's where you see like the flat edge of the binding, right? It is saddle stitched, which means that you see the staple running down the middle of the spine. Hold on, grab a sample for you. Hold on. My God, I'm making sounds like a very, very old person here. Okay, so this is a saddle stitch book, right? So you can see the middle of the book there, and in the center it looks like this, right? Okay, where there's a staple right down the middle of it, right? Most chapbooks will be published in this particular format, and some of that just has to do with cost. Oh, and I did find a True Story. Sorry, here's True Story, which with my dog Huckleberry's contribution. So bad. Anyways, so what they'll do is creative nonfiction will publish, and it really is about the same size as my particular book is. Okay, so it's about this one is actually a little bit shorter. It's about 29 pages long, but the copy runs a little bit longer, so it's probably about the same size. But every single month, True Story commissions one of these longer essays to publish. They dedicate some artwork to it, and then they get mailed out to the True Story subscribers, and that is the end of the run. Okay, that's the end of the print run. Whereas for something like this, basically the print run goes on as long as, or it'll keep on publishing as long as it keeps on selling. Okay, so right now this is now in its third printing, and it's going to go into its fourth pretty soon. Okay, so the idea being that at the end of the day, the publisher you choose will end up actually having to, you'll end up wanting to take a look at their distribution and how it is they pay you, right? For True Story, this is a one-time payment of, I think, $300, and then that's the end of it. So there's no royalty, there's no further distribution deal or anything like that. In fact, the distribution for True Story is only to the True Story subscribers, okay? And then whereas with Pinups, this is a retail type situation where it's at the bookstores, it's at Amazon, it's at REI, it's at whatever particular store wants to carry it. Okay, so at the end of the day, this is going to come right down to distribution and how it is, what kind of publishing deal you want. Okay, some of these may come with royalties. I don't really know. It just really depends. The thing I want us to take out of this, though, is that if you look at this list, it's a long list. There's a lot of places out there that are now publishing these chapbooks. So there is room, right? And that's not even to talk about the fact that like you could still theoretically, if I really wanted to, I could go out and I could pitch the hell out of this for like that to like Outside Magazine, right? Or I could send it to another publication that's a periodical. I wanted more longevity to this particular piece. And for me, that's the advantage of a nonfiction chapbook, is that you actually get more longevity out of the work and you can have it and, pass it out for as long as you like, really, or sell it for as long as you like. Okay. At the end of the day, that's kind of what it comes down to for me. Okay, so we have a lot of time left. I'm happy to, I think some of you previously were in my session before about query letters. And John, if you think it'd be useful to talk about querying, I can go into that, or I can just take questions.
Yeah, especially for the sort of upmarket magazine like Outdoor Magazine or something like that, because it's so different from literary pitching.
Yeah, I mean, it is. Let me go ahead and, so this will be the same presentation that I ran through earlier, if that's okay. A couple weeks ago, right? I think Kelsey, you were in that session, but I don't believe anybody else here was in that session. Okay, is that all right with you, John?
Yeah, that'd be great.
Okay, all right. So let me go ahead and pull that up then. Let's see here. Okay, so querying, as you know, is the process by which you get on a publisher's desk. All right, and this is not one of those things where we're not going to be talking about querying to agents in this time around, because you'll find very few agents that are even representing this particular market, right? It's not like it would just not be worth it for them in terms of the volume that's being sold now, because it is a very, very new market, right? And frankly, like when I talk about this book going into its fourth printing, that's great, but really we're talking about a total of about 1,100, 1,200 books, right? So it's not really like, it wouldn't be worth the agent's while to be able to represent somebody who only works in this particular category, unless you're banging one out like once every 6 months or something like that, right? Okay, and not to mention a lot of these publishers that are listed there don't have an advance that comes with it, and as you know, the agent's fee comes directly from the advance and then from whatever royalties you pick up. So because of that reason, there's less likely to be an agent that will pick up. So for the purposes of this, let's just think about going directly to the publisher, all right, which is what I did in this particular case. And let me just make sure I have the right presentation here pulled up. Let's see. Yeah, okay. Alrighty. Boop, boop. Share screen. Hey, John, next year, will you remind me whether or not I've advanced in terms of like being able to do this without talking everybody through this process as I do it?
Well, I've now been doing it every single day since March, so I don't know why.
All right, I love it. Okay, so here are the query letter components, right? Okay, so every single query letter has a greeting and a personalization, a premise and a hook, your bona fides, and then a closing. All right, and the greeting personalization I think is pretty important, right? Like, because a lot of times you get even when I was editing at a literary magazine, I would get the ones that were like, "Dear editor," right, or "Dear team," or whatever. And for me, it's like, I have a pretty big digital footprint. Like, people know that I'm the editor of this publication. So it's just a little skin off of your nose to just go and hunt down what the editor's name is and address them. In terms of going formal or informal, I always err on the side of formal. So if I haven't had contact with somebody before, it's always "Dear Mr." or "Dear Ms." Blank, whatever the last name is. Okay. The personalization. Oh, here, I'll move the chat screen, y'all, so you're not having to look at this. Oh my goodness gracious, what is happening here? Okay, so in terms of personalization, I really like it when somebody, as an editor, I really like it when somebody shows me that they've done the legwork into finding out who I am and what I like, right? So, and this is just something that's, you would do this in any professional letter, right? I mean, it's really not that different in that regards. You might say something like, "Oh, I saw your blog post over at this particular website," or "I really like what you published recently," right? So in cases like that, I think it's just really important to show that you know their particular flavor really well. I pitched this particular essay 2 places. One was to True Story, and the other was to the publisher I eventually ended up going with. And for each of them, I had a personal connection. So when I pitched True Story, I had been on a panel with the managing editor of the publication, the one who edits True Story. So what I said to her was, dear Hattie, I really enjoyed spending time with you at our panel at AWP 2 years ago. I think I finally have a true story that will be right for you. I'm hoping that you feel the same way, right? So that kind of type of thing. And I'll show you my query letter for pinups in a little bit here, okay? And then the premise and the hook really is all about the things that make your work unique and that will make them interesting, right? Okay, so in this particular case, this is just kind of like the backbone of any particular thing, right? You want to make something sound interesting, but accessible, right? So in this particular case, what I've done is to just fill in some things. This is kind of a really good template to follow, right? What's the unusual thing about this particular piece and what will make somebody else want to read it? And then a little description, right, of what how long the actual thing is and what the working title is, okay? And then the Bonafides, this is where you show off all of the things that you've done with your life that might contribute to something like book sales, right? And I'm going to spend a little bit of time here and talk to you about bona fides in the nonfiction world. It is more important in the nonfiction world than in the fiction world for you to demonstrate that you can sell books. And part of that has to do with the direct correlation between your capability to sell books and your expertise in the field, right? So for instance, you'll see I actually made a really big mistake in my cover letter for pinups. I did not mention the fact that I've been a member of the outdoors community in a professional fashion for many, many, many years. I didn't mention it. And that was ridiculous. It's a silly oversight because that's one of the things that would have really sold the book to begin with, right? Fortunately, I didn't need it, but now looking back on it, it's kind of one of those like face to palm kind of face palm. I don't know. I never can tell things that I wish I'd done. Okay, and then of course the closing, right? I hope we'll be able to work together. I anticipate your reply. Always check the guidelines, right? This says I have attached the first 3 pages below as per your guidelines because sometimes people ask for that. Again, in this particular field, people will treat things differently. They may decide that they want to see the whole thing. They may decide they don't want to see a portion of it. Okay. Can we normalize using corkly, please? Yes, we can. We can totally normalize using that phrase again. I will bring it back single-handedly, although now it seems like I don't have to because John is right there with me. Awesome. Okay. And then also, this closing here, I always tell people how to pronounce my name because weirdly enough, that is one of the things that stops people from calling you back. If they don't know how to pronounce your name, they're like, I don't know, I'm going to screw it up. And then they never call you, which might explain my dating life. No, I'm just kidding. Happily married. Okay. All right. Moving along. Okay. All right. So I'll give you a sample query letter. This is the query letter for my novel, which I'm not going to run you through. Let's go to the nonfiction query section. Okay. All right, so yeah, I mean, querying nonfiction people, let's not think about agents here. This is publishers, okay? Obviously start with the query letter and then read all the guidelines, like, because again, this is kind of, it's a little bit of a wild west in terms of what people want and what they don't want. You don't want to be the person who gets kicked out of the guidelines or gets kicked out of the slush pile just because you didn't follow the guidelines. Like, that's a really bad reason. Like, that's not the hill you want to die on, right? You don't want to like, oh, this is a publisher that hates papyrus font, so I'm gonna send him my query in papyrus font. Like that's a really bad reason to get kicked out of the query pile. Okay, so read the guidelines. Obviously, it doesn't come down to that. It comes down to something like, sometimes when people will ask for, they want to read blind. So for instance, they don't want to see your name anywhere on the manuscript, right? And if you make the mistake and you don't read the guidelines and you send them a package that has your name all over the place, again, that's a really bad reason to get kicked out of the query pile. Okay, so don't do that. Okay, so here's the query letter to Homebound Publications, who is eventually what ended up publishing my book. Okay, and also, by the way, FYI, this is pretty close to the same query that I would use if I was querying at a magazine. All right. So again, the greeting, the personalization here, right? Okay, and then here's the pitch. I'm attaching here a manuscript about my long, complicated relationship with sport, 9,100 words. And then I tell her exactly, what it's about, right? I stress the voluntary tokenism of women in sport, the complicated economic sport, and the field of women's leadership. I'm hopeful it might find a home in Homebound's Little Bound books line, right? So what I've done here is a couple of things. I've given her my relationship to the topic, right? And I've also given her kind of like the broader view of what it might be about, right? Um, as I'm looking at this, honestly, there's nothing really overly compelling about it, right? Other than the fact that like it's interesting and it's probably something that she hasn't covered before. In fact, I know that because I studied her line really, really closely before I actually sent her this query letter because I wanted to give myself the best shot, right? I wanted to give her something different. But if I were to do this again, I probably would make this even more personal. You know, I would say something more about how I've been thinking about this all my life, about how my relationship with sport has driven almost everything that I do, how it's opened up a lot more questions to me, how I'm now a diversity, equity, and inclusion educator partially because of it. Right. Okay. So I would that whole so what thing, I would have played that up a lot more in this particular query letter. All right. Okay, so then I go into this like long 2 paragraph of bona fides, right? Where it's like, here's the reason that you want to work with me. And part of the reason I did this was because this particular publisher, and actually nearly every small publisher, has a very big onus. They have a really big they lean on the author a lot to do a lot of their marketing, right? Okay, and that's true of nearly every small publisher. So don't feel like this is an abnormal thing. Essentially, what's happening here in our world of publishing is that because there are more and more venues to publish, it almost comes down to how much is the author willing to help me to publicize their own work, right? And at the end of the day, honestly, there's nobody better to do honor to your work than you are, right? You're the best person out there to do honor to your work. So lean into that. They had actually asked for a marketing statement. So that's part of the reason that I gave her all these bona fides. The reason was to demonstrate that I could be really strong and a really strong partner in marketing. And it's true, I am. But if I were writing this over again, I would have said a lot more about my personal relationship to sport and how I've been professionally involved for the last 20 years as a as a business professional. Okay. And then of course the closing. Okay. So at the end of the day, that's really all it is when it comes to writing a nonfiction query. But that's what it looks like, right? Okay. Um, it, yeah. Sorry, I'm not going to go to the rest of it because it will just muddy the waters for this particular thing. But yeah, you can take this particular module and you can use it in any way, shape, or form when it comes to querying other magazines or small publishers. Okay. All right. Okay. Questions. What do you do with the bona fides when you have not been published? That's a great question. Okay. So the thing about the bona fides is that when it comes to nonfiction, even if you haven't been published, it's not that big of a deal. All right. What they want to see is that you can produce something, right? And the essay itself will be some evidence of that, right? But when it comes to nonfiction, what really matters is your expertise in the particular field that you're talking about. Okay, so remember how I said in the letter that I wrote, I would have played up a lot more my involvement in outdoor sport, right? That's the type of thing that nonfiction publishers are going to be looking at. Like, what is her relationship to outdoor sport? Okay, for instance, there is one of those true story chapbooks that I was talking about. That's called Plume, right? And the woman who wrote it isn't actually a writer. She teaches at Middlebury College, right? But her expertise is in environmental investigation. Okay, and so the essay that she wrote was actually about how her relationship to environmental investigation allowed her to track down what was wrong with her child. Her child had a developmental disorder and she wasn't quite sure what it was about, right? So what she was able to do was to parlay her expertise in environmental investigation into a really interesting essay, right? And that ended up being part of her bona fides, right? The idea that she had expertise in this particular field. And it also probably helped, by the way, that the essay itself was formatted like an environmental investigation report, right? Even though those of us who were reading it and who'd never seen an environmental investigation report, we didn't know that. We were just kind of like, oh, this is an interesting format. We've never seen this before. We're going to keep on reading, right? So it just ended up being a really compelling read. But you're in nonfiction, your bona fides aren't all that important. In fiction, I mean, obviously you don't want to turn around something that's like gobbledygook and illegible, right? But at the end of the day, this is part of the reason the query letter is so important, right? If your query letter is well written, then it almost doesn't, it almost doesn't impact it as much. Okay. Yeah, I know. It's pretty cool, right? Yeah, John.
Also, if you're trying to publish for the first time and you want some help, especially with fiction, come to me or come to Lloyd, and we'll help you find the right magazine for you. And we're always available to do that.
Yeah, that's a great. Yeah, that's the other thing, right? We've talked before about. I talked a lot about community in this regard, and one of the things that I really want to encourage you all to do is lean on each other, and on the people who have more expertise in this field. Okay. All right. Anybody else have any questions? Okay. Great. You all have been terrific. Thank you so much for having me. Have I requested public records for an essay? No, I haven't, Kelsey. Kelsey's question is, have I ever requested public records for an essay? No, but I can see that happening in the future. And I know a lot of people who have done that. Do you have a question specifically related to that and how to do it? Okay. Yeah, you can. I mean, the Freedom of Information Act is. Yeah, go ahead.
I know it's there's a little bit of a process, but like once you get the hang of it, it can be a pretty nifty tool in terms of getting unique research or perspective on whatever you are looking up.
Yeah, no, that's a great point. The Freedom of Information Act is a beautiful, beautiful thing. And yeah, there's that information is readily available, by the way, online. You can find it. Google is a beautiful thing. I was talking to somebody earlier, Alan Rinsler, who said that he felt like there's never been a better time to be a writer. And he's right. There's a lot of places to publish, but I pair that with my mate Fernando Groh, who said that he believed that there was never a better time to be a person because all the education is available at our fingertips right now, right? It's like back in the day, you just had to join like the leather tanners guild or something in order to be able to make a crack at that living, right? And you had to pay a bunch of apprentice fees, and you never saw your parents again. You ate gruel and lived in a barn floor, and but it's like we don't have to do that anymore. You go to the YouTube. How to be a leather tanner.
You can just YouTube
awesome. Exactly. I have repaired so many things in my house. Like it's fantastic from the YouTubes, What do we do about those noisy trains? John's trains?
I've grown to love them, I slip right through them.
John Luna, was your question specifically about John branding his trains, or is that something you want me to Google so I can look it up for you and like we can figure out how to be an apprentice that takes care of noisy trains? Oh, he's just kidding. All right. You see, I went down a rabbit hole. It's very, very dangerous. All right. I'm going to put my email into the chat box here. The Apprentice Guild of Trains. Exactly. Okay, that's me in the inbox. Feel free to send me questions if you like. If anything burning comes across your brains later on that I wasn't able to answer today, you just let me know. But other than that, thank you so much, you all. I had such a great time. We'll see you again soon. Bye.
Thank you so much, Yishun.
Thank you. Speak to you soon.